The fairy star is an appropriated symbol.
If you would like to learn about fairy folklore, delve into modern fairy faith spirituality, and explore fun and fanciful fairy-themed events, please subscribe to Fairy Fortunes for new videos every Friday.
Hello, my fair friends. I'm Ruby Ruse, and this is Fairy Fortunes. Today, I would like to discuss the fairy star, which is a 7-pointed star. Now, this is a pretty ancient symbol, and there are many traditions that lay claim to this symbol. There are reports that it was featured in Sanskrit, that it is in ancient Christianity, and that it is also featured in the Kabbalah. Now, while it may be that it has been used in Sanskrit scrolls, I really couldn't find any historical evidence of it being a part of specifically Abrahamic traditions. Where this 7-pointed heptagram seems to come from is the concept of alchemy. Alchemy, if you're not familiar, was really the forefather of modern philosophy and modern science. However, it was a very occult-driven practice in ancient times. Alchemy is still alive and well in the modern world, but it's generally thought of a more spiritual avenue where the ideas and concepts are more of a metaphor for internal journey. And alchemy concepts are incorporated into many different mystical organizations such as the OTO, the Golden Dawn, and Masonry. So the 7-pointed star, as it related to alchemy, it correlated with the 7 original planets of astrology and also the 7 metals that were important to alchemy. The 7 planets that are important in both alchemy and astrology, if you're not familiar, are the Sun, the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. These, of course, were planets that could be seen in the sky with the naked eye in more ancient times. And the metals, of course, correlated to the planets. So gold was associated with the sun, silver with the moon, iron was with Mars, Mercury, of course, related to Mercury, tin related to Jupiter, copper related to Venus, and lead was related to Saturn. The 7-pointed star in alchemy is referred to as the vitral star. Vitral is an anagram for a Latin phrase which translates to "Search for the innermost of the earth, and you will, by rectifying, find the secret stone." So the stone, I think, that is referred to in this phrase, of course, is the alchemy stone or the philosopher's stone, which is said to be the necessary component that helps an alchemist transform the base metal of lead to the very exotic and desired metal of gold. Now, in a modern construct, an alchemist is more of a spiritual seeker in that the lead is the baseness of themselves, perhaps their flaws, and then they transmute those flaws into the best and highest version of themselves and become a gold version of themselves. But in an ancient context, it is possible that alchemists believed that they were trying to take the metal of lead and transform it with their sciences into the metal of gold. And if you know anything about the elements that go into gold and lead, they actually are very close on the periodic scale. The vitral star and the fairy star should not be confused with the Star of Babylon. The Star of Babylon is a symbol that we see in the OTO, and if you're not familiar with that mystical practice, that is the Ordo Tempus Orientis. I hope I'm saying that correct. Please don't come after me, members of the OTO. It has quite a bit in common with Freemasonry. It also has some commonalities with something called the Thelemic Knights. And the reason for that is, with the exception of the Freemasons, both the Thelemic Knights and the OTO were heavily influenced by Aleister Crowley. And he was the one that had visions of the goddess Babylon, and she comes from the Revelations portion of the Bible and is the whore of Babylon. Now, it should be noted that the OTO formulated in 1903, and Crowley was at the height of his teachings and his visions of Babylon around 1893. The Star of Babylon was something that Crowley came up with in that time frame. So that is really not an ancient symbol there. Now, I have kind of a hard truth for you. Bunny Bomb! Modern pagan religions in general are not ancient traditions. They are modern constructs. Now, that's not to say that they aren't viable and true. They are. And I think it is possible that people that are committed to these traditions are, in fact, having very real communications with these older gods and are coming up with rituals and practices that have meaning and are viable for the modern age. But the very hard truth is that they have nothing to do with ancient practices. That doesn't mean they're not important or less real. They are very important, and they are viable and living and important religious traditions. Much like that, fairy faith spirituality in the modern times is a modern construct. We didn't see fairy faith practice until about the 1960s in the Western world. Many of the practices were gleaned from ancient folklore and ancient mythology, but these traditions and pathways are modern constructs. I just want to be clear that the seven-pointed star does not appear in ancient fairy folklore. This is a modern symbol that is used by many different practitioners of modern fairy faith spirituality. There are many correlations to this symbol. One of them, of course, is the directions. So we have each spire represents a direction. We have north, south, east, and west, but it also includes the direction of above, below, and then within. And the concept of that within portion is that the seven-pointed star is supposed to take you to a completely different level, a different place than the traditional five-pointed star of modern paganism. And within different pathways of modern fairy faith spirituality, many different groups assign a particular concept to each of those spires. For example, Emily Carding, who is the author of Fairycraft, that is spelled Fairy, not to be confused with the Fairycraft of Morgan Daimler, which I'll talk about in a minute. But Emily Carding attributes these concepts to each of the seven spires, and those are knowledge, connection, trust, honor, magic, joy, and inspiration. Morgan Daimler is also a modern fairy faith practitioner, and her book is Fairycraft as well, but that is spelled in the modern way with Fairy. And she attributes the spires to hospitality, generosity, kindness, compassion, courage, politeness, and adventuresome. And finally, I found another fairy tradition talked about a little bit on the site not magic. And there the spires are determination, unconditional love, knowledge, harmony, mental power, honesty, and magic. And while I think most of these concepts are accurate and important and purposeful and definitely can be applied to the fairy faith spirituality, there is one that I have difficulty with, and that would be unconditional love. Unconditional love, in my personal opinion, really should be reserved for a love a parent has for a child. The reason that I say that is because a child is in a growing position, not quite subordinate, but definitely is in a position of growth, where the parent is in a position of more knowledge. And so unconditional love is reserved for that a child can tell the parent that they hate them, and that is accepted and moved away from. It doesn't change the nature of the love when the child feels hatred towards the parent. Unconditional love in the setting of a child and parent is that the parent is supposed to show the child boundaries, and the child is supposed to push against those boundaries. That is the dance and nature of the parent-child relationship. Unconditional love is also from a God figure to a devotee of that God figure. The devotee can make mistakes, they can slack off on their worship, they can do ill deeds, they can forget their oaths and vows, and yet that God figure still provides that unconditional love and helps lead the devotee to their spiritual path. But once again, the God figure is up here and the devotee is in a subordinate position. That's unconditional love. It's not on an equal playing field. But if you put it in a context of two grown adults having unconditional love for one another, now you're entering into difficult territory, because unconditional love in some ways has to rely on a person of higher knowledge and a person that has subordination. Love between two equals needs the boundaries that are learned from the parent-child relationship. Another thing is that unconditional love between two humans can lead to darker pathways. If you have unconditional love for someone, that allows that someone to abuse you again and again and again. I just think that we need to be careful about the concept of unconditional love and recognize that there is an unbalance of knowledge and power in those types of relationships. Now, fairy spirits, I think a great many of them are on an equal playing field with the gods. But the difference is that a god has unconditional love for their human devotees. Fairy spirits do not. They don't. Their love comes with boundaries. Their love often comes with conditions. And that's not a bad thing. A love between a fairy spirit and a human has the potential to be more equal than that of the love between a god and a devotee. So I personally would be hesitant to include unconditional love in modern fairy faith practice. A subset of the modern fairy faith spirituality is something called the Otherkin, and they are also using the 7-pointed fairy star as their symbol. Many people in the Otherkin movement would not identify Otherkin as being a spiritual practice, but it is a way of looking at their lives in an existential way. So I do think that it does have a lot of spirituality to it, because it is that meta and existential way of looking at their lives and how they interact with the world. The concept of Otherkin is such a huge topic, it really probably should get a video all on its own. So if you would please, if you are interested and would like to know more about the concept of Otherkin, leave your questions in the comments below and I will do some more research on that topic for you. For me personally, what I think the 7 points of the fairy star represent are the concepts of respect, truth, gratitude, integrity, wit, perseverance, and pleasure. And I elaborate on those 7 important concepts in my video. Fairy morality is not about good or evil. 7 fairy values. And I also have a huge list of resources in the description box down below for you. I do want to point out that a few of them do have affiliate links on them. The affiliate links do help support the Fairy Fortune channels, so that is a help to me, but no pressure if you do not want to use those links. Part of the focus on Fairy Fortunes is to share with you my own take on modern fairy faith spirituality, and I continue that discussion on Facebook and Instagram, and I have unique content on both of those platforms almost daily. You can also visit my website, www.fairyfortunes.com. I do sell professional fortune-telling readings of the Fairy Fortune divination system, but I also have a blog that further discusses the topics of fairy folklore, modern fairy faith spirituality, and fairy-themed events. So I do hope that you might check me out on one of those platforms. And with that, have a magical day.